Mephistopheles in Faust or Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. These were Henry Irving's greatest roles, or the ones for which he was most popular. Psychologically complex villains.
Irving would have been perfect for the part. After all, he already was a boss from hell.
Irving really was a vampire, and he really was a kind of horrible person who fed on the energy of others. They did an interminably long reading of the novel at the Lyceum for purposes of copyright, and Irving was reputed to have walked through the theater and intoned "dreadful" and walked out. And that was stupid of him. It would have been a very good part, and he should have done it. And now Dracula's more famous than he is.
Bram Stoker died in 1912 and never saw his story properly dramatized. But 9 years later, the character of Dracula made his first screen appearance in a now-lost Hungarian film called Dracula's Death. The plot owed almost nothing to Stoker or his book, but I guess Dracula's movie career had to start somewhere.
In the story, Dracula plays a music teacher who has gone crazy and then is after some of the patients in the asylum. So the story plays more like a Phantom of the Opera than Dracula. But however, there is this idea of a monster loose with fangs and a cape.
The following year, German filmmakers got on the Dracula bandwagon with Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. It remains one of the most frightening movies ever made, a classic example of German expressionism.
It's so frightening. Well, for one thing, Dracula is so evil, he's disgusting, and he's a plague spreader. And he looks like a rat. There's nothing suave about him.
The Dracula character was called Count Orlok and was played by a German stage actor named Max Schreck, whose name, by happy coincidence, means terror or fright in German. And it was his real name. It wasn't just a publicity stunt for the film. And he remains to this day the single screen Dracula who really embodies the essential repulsiveness that Stoker intended.
In the early part of the century, the laws of copyright were not well understood, especially with filmmaking. And Piranha Films, which was the very small studio that made Nosferatu, did not either bother or know to get a copyright from Bram Stoker's widow.
Murnau used the novel without clearing the rights, and in fact eventually got involved in a big lawsuit, and the film had to be literally pulled from the market.
With 2 movies already to his credit, Dracula decided to give the theater another try. In 1924, the British actor-manager Hamilton Deane added the first authorized dramatization of Dracula to his popular traveling repertory. Film historian and former actor Ivan Butler was a member of Deane's company.
He had to cut it down for expense, for one thing, and it's such a vast, rambling novel. It was a sort of skeleton of the original.
It was Hamilton Deane who really created the modern image of Dracula, and he took his inspiration not from Henry Irving's Shakespearean villains, but from a much lower end of the theater. And essentially, his Dracula is a kind of vaudeville or music hall magician, you know, the suave trickster in evening clothes who knows how to work a crowd.
When they came to London, of course, and the dreadful notices they had, as we all know, they were very depressed, and somebody came up to him and said, "Well, what are you worrying about? Have you looked outside?" And there was halfway around the block queuing for it.
Several actors performed the role of Dracula for Deane, including Raymond Huntley, who played the part thousands of times in England and America, and still holds the all-time record for sheer number of performances. Ivan Butler worked with the noted actor W.E. Holloway.
He was an older man, usually, very, very gaunt looking, very deep-set eyes and everything, and a good voice, and it seemed to work better, more like the real Dracula in a way. But he always seemed to me to have something that the young ones lacked. There was no sort of sex attraction in those days. Dracula came for one thing only, his evening drink. We had the bat coming in to the window, French window, as you see, at the end of the second act. It was a big scene. The assistant stage manager was standing on a stool with a fishing rod, a big long fishing rod, and about 2 foot of bat. And he was floating it around outside like that. And it banged into the window, and smoke came and everything. Then Dracula appeared out of the mist. One day, I don't know why, but the string attached to the bat, of the fishing rod, broke. And the bat sailed through the window, right across the stage, and floated down and landed in the floats, the 2 green eyes looking outside. And then, of course, Dracula himself had to appear. It must have been difficult to explain. I think possibly a rather bewildered audience went, well, are there 2 bats or 2 Draculas?
The stage production was corny, but it was a crowd pleaser, and it was full of startling special effects and loud noises and flash bombs and swirling fog and a trick coffin for Dracula that was essentially a magician's disappearing cabinet.
Dracula got in, and there was a false bottom under the boards. He would pull the string, and the boards would open like that. Dracula would fall down into the base of the coffin, and the fuller's earth would all fly out into smoke like that, and it would look as if he disappeared into dust.
Given Dracula's success in London, it was only a matter of time before Broadway beckoned. The producer, Horace Liveright, wanted changes and hired the playwright-journalist John L. Balderston to improve the product.
One day, Horace Liveright, who was a New York producer, was taken to see Dracula. But he was concerned over the Britishness of the language and a lot of idiomatic stuff that nobody in New York would understand. So he asked my father if he would rewrite it.
In the 1920s, the only kind of vampires American audiences knew about were vamps like Theda Bara. For the Broadway version of Dracula, Horace Liveright wanted a male vamp, an exotic foreigner with an air of mystery and sex appeal.
The budget was pretty tight, and they had cast all the parts except for the Count, and they were out of money. So they couldn't hire a name actor to do the Count.
Liveright found exactly what he was looking for